The sound came before anything else. Not the guns, not the bombs, the breathing, heavy, ragged, broken. The kind of breathing that comes from a man who knows he is about to die but has not yet decided if he will let it happen. July 10th, 1943. Scogliti Beach, southern coast of Sicily. 200 American soldiers lay flat on wet sand, faces pressed into the earth, not one of them daring to lift his head more than 3 inches above the ground. German machine gun fire swept across the waterline like a steel curtain ripping through the surf, shredding the wooden hulls of landing craft, punching holes in the bodies of men who had been alive 30 seconds ago. Officers screamed orders that no one followed. A 19-year-old private from Kansas cried for his mother in a voice that would haunt the survivors for decades. Flares burst overhead, turning the night into a pale, sickly daylight that made every man on that beach feel naked. But 14 soldiers were not on the beach. They had vanished. Somewhere between the moment the Higgins boats hit the shallows and the moment the machine guns opened up, 13 men from the 181st Infantry Regiment slipped sideways into the darkness, like water finding a crack in stone. They moved by hand signals and bird calls, not a single boot fall, loud enough to hear above the waves. They communicated in a language that no German intelligence officer on Earth could decode. Not Morse code, not military cipher. Muskogee Creek, the language of their grandmothers. The language that the United States government had spent 50 years trying to beat out of them in boarding schools across Oklahoma. By sunrise, 7 German machine gun nests had gone silent. Sentries lay dead with their hands still reaching for weapons they never touched. German intelligence sent back a single panicked line to division headquarters. "We are being hunted by ghosts." But these were not ghosts. These were the men that America itself had tried to erase. Their language, their culture, their memory, their names, and in the next 24 hours, the leader of these 14 soldiers would carry a wounded German sergeant on his back for 4 miles through enemy territory to an American aid station. He would leave beside that German a half-melted chocolate bar, the last piece of home he carried in his chest pocket. This is the story of Samuel Harjo, the soldier the Germans called a devil, the soldier America called a savage, the soldier that history almost forgot. Let me tell you what Samuel Harjo did not know. He did not know that the German whose life he would save was the same man whose coordinates had guided the artillery shells that killed 23 Americans on this very beach 2 nights earlier. He did not know that the truth would find him, and he did not know that it would take him 43 years to understand why he made the choice he made. To understand Samuel Harjo, you have to leave Sicily. You have to go back 5 years, 400 miles inland, to a place where the wind blows so hard across the plains that it bends the grass flat and makes the telephone poles hum. Like tuning forks. You have to go to Oklahoma, autumn 1938, the Calaco Indian Agricultural School, Kay County, Oklahoma. A cluster of red brick buildings sitting in the middle of a sea of grass so vast it made you dizzy if you stared at the horizon too long. The United States government built Calaco in 1884 for one purpose and one purpose only: to take the Indian out of the child, cut their hair, burn their clothes, forbid their languages, replace their names with Christian ones, teach them to farm like white men, pray like white men, and forget everything their grandparents ever told them. Samuel Harjo was 17 years old, head shaved to the scalp, gray uniform 2 sizes too big, standing in line with 120 other native students from more than 20 tribes: Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, Osage, Comanche, Kiowa, all of them brought here for the same reason. All of them expected to come out the other side as something they were not. The smell of that place stayed with Sam for the rest of his life. Carbolic soap in the communal showers, boiled oatmeal in the dining hall, the leather strap that the headmaster kept on his desk for any child caught speaking a word that was not English. Lunch was thin porridge, a square of stale white bread, and a glass of powdered milk that tasted like chalk dissolved in water. Sam looked down at his tray and saw nothing that reminded him of home. Nothing that smelled like the banaha his mother Martha made on the outdoor fire pit behind their house in Okmulgee. Corn dough wrapped in corn husks, steamed in a clay pot, the smell of ripe corn braided with the smoke of oak wood. That smell was 400 miles away. It might as well have been on the moon. Henry Tallchief sat beside him, taller than Sam by half a head, shoulders wide enough to fill a door frame, hands that looked like they were built for breaking rocks. Henry was Osage. His people were the richest tribe in America because of the oil beneath their land. But Henry's family never saw a dime of that money because the government had assigned a white guardian to manage their trust funds. The guardian drove a Cadillac. Henry's mother walked 3 miles to the general store. Henry finished his porridge and looked at Sam's tray. Sam pushed it across the table. Henry nodded, no words needed. They had been speaking without words since they were 13, sneaking out of the punishment room at Coloco through a window that Henry could reach and Sam could fit through. But Sam Harjo had a secret that he kept from everyone at Chilocco. Every night after lights out, he lay in the darkness of the dormitory and whispered words in Muskogee Creek. The words his grandfather Thomas had taught him, sitting on the back porch of the family house in Okmulgee. Este Cade, brother, effective, warrior, hawked, woman, hesky, son. He repeated them like prayers, like spells against forgetting. He was terrified that if he stopped, the language would die inside him. And if the language died, his grandfather would die a second time. Sam did not know it then, but the Muskogee Creek he protected in the darkness of a boarding school dormitory would save his life and the lives of 13 men on a beach in Sicily 5 years later. Because the Germans could crack every code the Allies threw at them. Morse, radio frequencies, military encryption. But not one intelligence officer in the entire Third Reich could decode Muskogee Creek. If you are listening to this story and you feel it deserves to be told, hit subscribe. Because the story of Samuel Harjo and the Thunderbird Warriors almost disappeared from history. And what happens next will change everything you think you know about World War II. Summer 1938. Sam came home to Okmulgee for the break. The Harjo family house was a small wooden structure on the edge of the creek reservation. No electricity, no running water, but there was an outdoor fire pit where Martha cooked, and there was a back porch where grandfather Thomas sat every evening and watched the sun go down over the tallgrass prairie. Thomas Harjo was 72 years old, a veteran of the First World War, 36th Infantry Division, the Texas Division. On the right side of his chest, just below the collarbone, there was a scar the size of a silver dollar from a piece of German shrapnel at the Meuse-Argonne offensive in France in 1918. He never talked about the war, except for one story. Martha Harjo made sofgay on the outdoor fire pit that evening, traditional Creek corn soup. White hominy corn simmered with wood ash until it was soft as cream. The smell of cooked corn drifted through the Oklahoma evening air, mixed with the scent of dry grass and the damp earth after a late afternoon rain. Sam sat on the porch bare feet on the cool wooden floor, holding the hot bowl of sofgay with both hands. The taste was sweet from the corn, faintly salty from the ash, and warm in a way that spread from his stomach to his fingertips. This was the taste of home, the taste of safety, the taste of knowing exactly where you belong. Grandfather Thomas sat beside him, his own bowl cradled in weathered hands, and told the only war story he ever told. In 1918, I captured a German soldier, a boy, 19 years old, shaking like a leaf, crying for his mother in German. My squad wanted to shoot him. I said no. I carried that boy 3 miles back to our lines on my back. He lived. I never learned his name. But I learned one thing. A true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. A true warrior carries the fallen man back to his feet. Sam was 17. He heard those words and did not fully understand them. 25 years later, on a rocky hillside in Sicily, he would. December 7th, 1941. The radio in the Harjo house crackled with static, and then with news that changed the world. Pearl Harbor, Japanese planes, American ships burning in the harbor. War. Thomas Harjo sat in his chair on the porch for a long time saying nothing, staring at the horizon as if he could see across the ocean. Then he turned to Sam and spoke words that Sam would carry into battle. They will come for you, and you will go. Not because they deserve it, but because this land deserves it. This land was ours before they came, and it will be ours after they leave. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, early 1942. The same military base where the great Apache war chief Geronimo had been imprisoned 40 years earlier was now the training ground for the grandchildren of the warriors the Army had once fought against. The irony was thick enough to choke on, but nobody mentioned it. Sam Harjo and Henry Tallchief enlisted together. Assigned to the 181st Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds. The division patch was a golden Thunderbird on a red diamond. Sam looked at it the first time he sewed it onto his shoulder and recognized it immediately. A sacred symbol of his people, borrowed by the Army, like everything else. The 181st was a patchwork. You could hear at least 6 languages in the barracks on any given night. Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, Osage, Comanche, and the English that regulations required. Native soldiers made up nearly a third of the regiment. The rest were white men from Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico. The mix created a unit unlike any other in the United States Army. Second Lieutenant Robert Hadley arrived at the 181st in the spring of 1942, 26 years old, Texas A&M graduate. 6'1", sandy blonde hair, square jaw, blue eyes cold as creek water in January. The Hadley family owned a cattle ranch outside Abilene, Texas. His father had worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the land allotment program that the Creek Nation called by its real name, land theft. Hadley was not a villain from a storybook. He did not scream at the native soldiers. He did not use slurs. He did something worse. He was polite, and he did not believe. He assigned native soldiers to kitchen duty transport cleanup. He wrote in his personal journal words that Sam would not read until 40 years later. They are adequate soldiers when properly supervised, but they should not be placed in positions requiring independent initiative. During a marksmanship exercise, Sam fired 10 rounds from an M1 Garand, 10 hits, 7 in the black center ring. Henry Tallchief scored nearly identical. Hadley reviewed the results, nodded, and said nothing. When the training sergeant recommended Sam for a forward scout position, Hadley declined. Harjo is better suited for the communications detail. They are good at carrying loads. Sam heard it. Every word. His fist tightened around the rifle stock until his knuckles turned white. Henry put a hand on Sam's shoulder. Let them talk. We prove it with action. And here is the thing you need to understand about Samuel Harjo. The fire burning inside him was not aimed at the Germans, not yet. The fire was aimed at America itself, at Calaco, where they cut his hair and forbade his language, at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where they stole his grandfather's land, at Robert Hadley in that polite, dismissive nod that said more than any slur ever could. Sam carried that anger the way some men carry a knife, hidden, sharp, always within reach. That anger would become the central battle of Sam's life, not the battle against the Germans, the battle against himself. Who was he fighting for? A country that treated him like a stranger in his own home, or the man standing next to him? And when the enemy fell, would that anger make him walk past without looking back? Samuel Harjo would have to answer that question in less than a year. On a hillside in Sicily with a German soldier bleeding at his feet. And the answer would follow him for the remaining 60 years of his life. The training months passed in a blur of heat and dust and repetition. 10-mile runs in the July Oklahoma sun temperature, 105 degrees. White soldiers collapsed by the roadside. Native soldiers kept running, not because they were physically superior, but because their grandparents had run farther. In the forced relocations that history books call the Trail of Tears. Night exercises. While other units stumbled and cursed in the darkness, the native soldiers moved like water downhill. They read the stars. They read the wind. They read the smell of the earth. Skills that did not come from West Point. Skills that came from grandfathers who hunted deer in the Wichita Mountains before the reservations existed. Sam and Henry developed a communication system that blended Muscogee Creek and Osage words into a hybrid code. No officer understood it. No code machine could break it. This was the secret weapon that the United States Army had accidentally created. By trying to destroy native languages, they had forged an unbreakable cipher. That communication system would be tested for the first time, not in a training room, but on a blood-soaked beach in the Mediterranean. And 14 lives would depend on whether Henry Tallchief could hear a single Creek word through the sound of bombs. June 1943, the Atlantic Ocean. The USS Leonard Wood carried the 45th Division across the gray expanse of water toward North Africa and then toward Sicily. Sam stood on the deck and looked at the ocean. He had never seen the sea before. A boy who grew up on the Oklahoma plains now stood in the middle of more water than he thought existed in the world. Below deck in the hold that smelled of engine oil and the sweat of 500 men packed together in heat that felt like an oven, Sam and Henry shared their last quiet meal before war. Henry reached into his pack and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Cornbread, dry, crumbly, faintly sweet. His sister Ruth had baked it and sent it with him from Fairfax, Oklahoma. Henry broke the bread in two and gave half to Sam. They chewed slowly, saying nothing, letting the taste of home sit on their tongues as long as possible. Dry corn, a trace of sweetness, the faint ghost of wood smoke. The taste of Oklahoma in the middle of the Atlantic. Henry said quietly, "I'm going to bring the smell home, no matter what happens." Sam nodded. He slipped his half of the cornbread into his left chest pocket next to the letter from his mother. He would keep it there for 3 weeks, through 3 battles, through a night when he nearly died. And when he finally took it out, it would not be for himself. The night of July 9th, 1943, the Mediterranean Sea. The waves were high, unusually high. The wind howled. Soldiers vomited over the rails and into their helmets. Sam did not vomit. He was used to hardship, but he could not sleep. For the first time in his life, Samuel Harjo was afraid. Not afraid of dying, afraid of running, afraid that when the guns started, his legs would stand still, but his soul would flee. Grandfather Thomas had told him once, "Fear is not the enemy. Fear is the wolf that walks beside you. If you run, it chases. If you stand still, it sits down next to you." Ernest Childers walked through the hold that night, checking on his men. Lieutenant Childers, Muskogee Creek like Sam, the highest-ranking native officer in the regiment, a quiet man who led by competence and nothing else. When he reached Sam, he sat down. He spoke in Creek, soft enough that only Sam could hear. "Heski havdit keomes, the sun will rise." Then he stood and walked on. 4 words, enough. The sun will rise. Ernest Childers did not know that those words would be the last thing many soldiers heard before stepping into the landing craft. And for some of them, the sun would never rise again. July 10th, 1943, 2:45 in the morning. Storm, waves 6 feet high. The Higgins boats rocked so violently that men who had survived the Atlantic crossing without a complaint now vomited between their boots. The order came. Go. The water was chest deep and cold as January when Sam jumped from the ramp. Salt filled his mouth. The weight of his rifle and pack dragged him down. Sand shifted under his feet like something alive. Then the first sound came. Not a bang, a whisper. The soft foot of machine gun rounds cutting the surface of the water inches from his face. Then the muzzle flashes on the hill. Then the screaming. 200 men hit the sand and stayed down. Lieutenant Hadley screamed, "Move! Move!" But Hadley himself was flat on his stomach, face pressed into the wet sand, and he was not moving either. Sam looked at Henry. Henry looked at Sam. No words. Sam made a hand signal. Creek sign language they had developed at Fort Sill. It meant go right, follow me. 14 native soldiers peeled away from the mass of pinned men. They crawled to the right, following a natural rainwater channel in the sand moving out of the kill zone. Sam gave orders in Creek. Henry relayed them. Each man spoke only one word at a time, quiet enough to disappear beneath the sound of the waves. They reached the first machine gun nest from behind. No rifles, knives in hands. Silent. Then the second, the third. By the fourth, a German sentry screamed before he fell. Searchlights snapped on, but by then 7 nests were already silent. In the chaos that followed, Hadley heard that the gun positions had been neutralized. He led a squad up the hill to support, but Hadley tripped a parachute flare mine. White light blazed across the beach. Hadley stood in the center of it like a man on a stage, the brightest target on the entire coastline. A German marksman on the ridge took aim. Sam saw the muzzle flash. In that fraction of a second, he had a choice. This was the son of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the man who put him on kitchen duty, the man who wrote that Squame lacked independent initiative. If Sam did nothing, the marksman would solve the problem for harm for him. No one would ever know that Sam had seen 1 second, 2 seconds. Then Grandfather Thomas spoke in Sam's mind. A true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. But Hadley had not fallen. Hadley was standing blazing with light, about to die. Sam lunged. He hit Hadley at full speed, driving both of them into the dirt. The bullet buried itself in the sandbag exactly where Hadley's chest had been 1 second earlier. They lay on the ground gasping. Hadley stared at Sam. His eyes were wide open. For the first time, Robert Hadley saw Samuel Harjo, not a native soldier, not a man who needed supervision, a man who had just saved his life. Hadley whispered, "Harjo." Sam was already on his feet, already moving. He did not save Hadley for gratitude. He did not save Hadley for recognition. He saved Hadley because, if he had not, he would have become exactly what Hadley's journal said he was. And Samuel Harjo refused to be written by another man's hand. That moment changed Robert Hadley, but not immediately. And before Hadley could change, he would give an order that nearly killed the very men who saved his life. Dawn broke over Skog Liddy on July 10, 1943. Golden sunlight poured across a beach littered with shattered landing craft, empty ammunition crates, and bloodstains that the Mediterranean tide was slowly washing away. The Americans had made it ashore. The price was high. News of the 14 native soldiers who had silenced 7 machine gun nests in the dark spread faster than radio signals. Soldiers from other units stared at them with a mixture of curiosity and something close to awe. A white sergeant from Alabama asked how they moved so quietly. Henry Tallchief answered with 2 words. Grandparents taught. Word reached General Patton. He marked the 181st on his map. He told his staff, "Give me more units like that and I will be in Berlin by Christmas." But Hadley's transformation was slow. He stopped assigning Sam to the kitchen detail. He started placing Sam on forward reconnaissance. He began asking Sam's opinion about terrain. Small changes. But Sam noticed something Hadley still could not bring himself to do. Hadley still wrote reports with white officers' names at the top, even when native soldiers had done the work. Hadley still could not give credit where it was due. This was the subtle kind of racism. Not shouting, not slurs, just erasure. And Sam knew. That evening, Sam sat against a stone wall on a Sicilian hillside and opened his sea ration. Cold canned meat stew that tasted like wet cardboard, hard biscuits that could chip a tooth, a packet of instant coffee that would need water he could not spare, and a Hershey's chocolate bar. Sam bit into the chocolate and stopped chewing. The sweetness hit his tongue and pulled a memory out of nowhere. He was 5 years old, standing in the general store in Okmulgee. Grandfather Thomas was buying a chocolate bar. 1 bar, the most expensive thing Thomas had bought in months. He handed it to Sam with a smile. Sam remembered the taste of that chocolate melting on his tongue. He remembered his grandfather's face. That was the last time Sam saw Thomas smile. Sam wrapped the remaining half of the chocolate bar in its foil and slipped it into his left chest pocket, next to the cornbread from Henry, next to the letter from his mother. Everything he carried from home right there above his heart. That half a chocolate bar would never be eaten by Sam. It would stay in his pocket for 3 more weeks. Through 3 battles, through the night, he almost died. And when it finally came out of that pocket, it would not be for Samuel Harjo. It would be for the last person on earth anyone would expect. Night fell. Sam sat alone on a boulder looking at the dark shape of the hills where Biscari Airfield hid somewhere in the blackness. Tomorrow would be the first real battle. The beach had been K. Biscari would be hell. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out the dry cornbread from Henry. He held it to his nose. The smell was fading, almost gone, but still there. He put it back. Tomorrow, Samuel Harjo would walk into the most savage battle of his life. He would lose the most precious thing he had. He would face the same choice his grandfather faced 25 years before. And his answer would determine not only his own fate, but the fate of a German soldier named Klaus Reinhardt, who at this very moment sat in a bunker 3 miles away, writing a letter to his mother in Dresden, telling her he missed the sound of the piano in their living room and the smell of the stollen she baked every Christmas. 2 young men, 2 letters home, 2 mothers waiting, 1 war about to bring them face to face. The sun had set on the first day of the invasion of Sicily, but for Samuel Harjo, the real war had not yet begun. The morning of July 11, 1943, announced itself not with light, but with heat. By 6 o'clock, the temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees, and the Sicilian sun had barely cleared the eastern hills. The air tasted like dust and cordite, and something metallic that Sam would later learn was the taste of fear baked into dry earth. Biscari Airfield sat on a flat plateau 2 miles north of the American advance, a strip of packed dirt and concrete defended by the Hermann Goering Division. Not old men, not conscripts. Luftwaffe elite, Fanatics who had been told that retreat was treason and surrender was death. They had dug 3 lines of concrete bunkers around the airfield, strung razor wire across every approach, and buried enough mines in the southern road to turn a Sherman tank into scrap metal. The order came down from division headquarters at dawn. Take the airfield before the Germans destroy the runway. General Patton needed that runway for Allied fighters. Without air cover, the entire Western advance would stall. The 181st Infantry Regiment drew the assignment. And the 181st drew it because the 181st had already proven on the beach at Skogliti that they could do what other units could not. Lieutenant Hadley gathered his officers around a map spread across the hood of a jeep. The plan was standard West Point doctrine: artillery preparation along the southern approach. Infantry advance behind the barrage. Push through the wire, take the bunkers one by one. It was a plan that looked clean on paper. But paper does not bleed. Sam stood at the back of the group, saying nothing, watching Hadley trace the attack route with his finger. Sam was not looking at the map. He was looking at the terrain to the west. A stretch of broken ground, jagged limestone outcrops, thorn bush, and loose scree that the Germans had not bothered to defend because no sane commander would send men through it. The ground looked impassable, but Sam had seen ground like that before. The Badlands west of Okmulgee, where he and Henry had run as boys chasing jackrabbits through ravines so narrow you had to turn sideways to pass. The Sicilian rock was lighter in color. The thorns were different, but the principle was the same. Where a trained eye saw obstacle, a Creek eye saw corridor. Sam stepped forward. "Sir, if you will allow it, there is an approach from the west." Hadley looked up. He looked at Sam. He looked at the map. He looked at the broken ground. The silence lasted 3 seconds, but it contained an entire history. Hadley remembered the beach. He remembered the bullet that would have killed him. He remembered the hand that pushed him down. "How many men do you need?" Hadley said. 14, same team as the beach." Hadley hesitated. Then he said something that surprised everyone present, including himself. "Go, but if you get pinned down, you come back. I am not sending a rescue party into that wasteland." What Hadley meant was simple. There would be no support, no artillery, no reinforcements. If Sam and his 13 men got trapped in that broken ground, that they would die there, and Hadley would write the report saying he had advised against it. But Sam heard something else in Hadley's voice. He heard the first crack in a wall that had stood for generations. Hadley was not ordering Sam to go. He was allowing Sam to lead. That was enough. 13 men left the staging area at 0700. They dropped their heavy packs. They carried only rifles, knives, grenades, canteens, and 60 rounds each. Nothing else. Every ounce mattered when you were climbing rock that could slice through boot leather. The western approach was everything the Germans believed it to be. Impassable. Limestone ridges sharp as broken glass cut through trouser legs and drew blood from palms. Thornbush raked across exposed skin, leaving welts that swelled in the heat. The sun reflected off the white stone with such intensity that the men squinted even in shadow. Sweat poured into their eyes, stinging and blurring their vision. There was no shade. There was no breeze. The air sat on them like a wool blanket soaked in hot water. But 13 men moved through it like a single snake, winding between rock faces, sliding through crevices, finding footholds on ledges that should not have supported a man's weight. Sam led. Henry followed. At the rear, Private Frank Bigbow, a 20-year-old Comanche from Lawton, Oklahoma, erased their tracks as they went. Bigbow was the youngest of the group, wiry and fast, with hands that could find a grip on wet glass. His job was to make sure that if a German patrol stumbled onto their route, they would find nothing but rock and dust. 30 minutes. They covered the distance in 30 minutes. When Sam reached the western perimeter of the airfield, he lay flat on his stomach behind a limestone shelf and looked at what lay before him. One strand of razor wire, one observation post, one German sentry facing east watching the artillery barrage that was chewing up the southern road. The sentry had a cigarette in his mouth. The smoke curled upward in the still air. He was bored. He was confident. He was looking the wrong direction. Sam gave the signal in Creek. One word. Henry circled left. Bigbow circled right. Sam went straight. The sentry turned around when Sam was 4 feet away. For a fraction of a second, the German's eyes went wide. Then Sam was on him. Silent, fast, final. 13 men poured through the cut wire. They were inside the German perimeter before the southern assault had even begun. They had two choices: attack the western ammunition depot and cut the supply line to the main gun emplacements, or assault the command post directly. Sam chose the depot. Practical, lower risk, higher impact. If the guns ran out of shells, the southern attack would succeed without the bloodbath that Hadley's plan guaranteed. They moved through the airfield in pairs, hugging walls, crossing open ground in bursts of 3 seconds or less. The noise of the artillery barrage masked their footsteps. German soldiers ran past them in the trench system, heading south to reinforce the bunkers, never looking west, never imagining that the enemy was already behind them. Sam and Henry reached the ammunition depot at 1038, a concrete bunker stacked with mortar, shells, machine gun belts, and crates of rifle ammunition. Two guards outside, both looking south. Sam nodded to Henry. Henry nodded to Big Bo. 3 grenades, cooked for 2 seconds to reduce the fuse time, thrown simultaneously. The explosion shook the airfield like an earthquake. A column of black smoke rose 100 feet into the sky. Secondary explosions followed as mortar shells detonated inside the bunker, sending shrapnel screaming across the tarmac. German soldiers dove for cover, confused, disoriented. They thought they were being attacked from behind. They thought their retreat route had been cut. At that exact moment, the southern assault began. 200 American soldiers rose from their positions and charged the wire. The Germans, caught between the fire from the south and the chaos from the west, broke. Their defensive line collapsed in 2 hours. Biscari Airfield fell into American hands with the runway intact. Patton arrived that afternoon. His jeep raised a plume of dust that could be seen for a mile. He stepped out, adjusted his ivory-handled pistol, and surveyed the airfield. The runway was scratched but usable. The German bunkers were shattered. He asked one question: who blew the ammunition depot? A group of 14 native soldiers from the 181st Sur. They came through the western broken ground. Patton looked at the map. He looked at the terrain marked as impassable. He stared for a long time. "I would not send a mule through there," he said. "They walked it, sir. 13 men, 30 minutes. Patton said nothing for 10 seconds. Then he spoke words that his aide recorded in the daily log. "Give me a division of men like that, and I will be in Berlin next month." But the men who had taken Biscari did not hear the compliment. They were already cleaning their weapons in the shade of a bombed-out hangar, drinking warm water from their canteens, trying not to think about what came next, because word had already come down. The next objective was worse. The soldiers gave it a name that would never appear on any official map. They called it Bloody Ridge, a jagged spine of limestone near the town of San Stefano, rising 300 feet above the coastal road. The Germans had fortified it with everything they had left: machine guns, mortars, pre-registered artillery. They held the high ground, and they held it with the desperation of men who knew that losing this ridge meant losing Sicily. Standard military doctrine said you did not attack a position like that without overwhelming artillery support and at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. The 181st had neither. Hadley received the order and went pale. Sam watched the color drain from the lieutenant's face and understood immediately. This was not Biscari. This was not a flanking maneuver through broken ground. This was a fortress on top of a cliff defended by men who would rather die than surrender. And the 181st was being told to take it head on. Hadley gathered his officers. His plan was to assault the southern slope in a frontal attack at dawn. Native soldiers would form the spearhead of the advance. Sam heard the plan and felt ice settle in his stomach. The southern slope was wide open, no cover, no concealment. No. The Germans would see them coming from half a mile away. Machine guns would cut them down before they reached the first rock. The men at the front of that spearhead would die. And Hadley was putting native soldiers at the front. Sam stepped forward. "Sir, the northern face has a cliff wall. No one thinks it can be climbed, but if we can get 13 men up that wall while the southern assault draws fire." Hadley cut him off. "I am not repeating Biscari. That was luck. This is a fortified position." The argument might have ended there. But Ernest Childers, who commanded another company in the regiment, walked into the tent. Childers had heard the plan. He asked to speak with Hadley privately. No one knows exactly what Childers said. But when Hadley emerged 5 minutes later, the plan had changed. The Southern assault would proceed as planned. It would draw German fire and attention. But simultaneously, Sam and 13 men would climb the northern cliff face and hit the German positions from behind. Hadley looked at Sam with an expression that was equal parts fear and something that might have been the beginning of respect. Harjo, if you are right this time, I will put the right names in the report. If you are wrong, we both die. Sam held Hadley's gaze. If I am wrong, Lieutenant, you will not need to write a report. The assault began at 5 in the morning before dawn on a day in the third week of July, 1943. The southern slope erupted in fire. 200 men charged uphill into a wall of bullets. German mortars dropped shells with precision that turned the earth into fountains of dirt and stone and flesh. Men fell, men screamed, men kept running into the smoke because stopping meant dying where you stood, and at least running gave you the illusion of control. But every German gun on that ridge was pointed south. Every pair of German eyes was focused on the slope below. No one looked north. No one thought to look north, because the northern face was a vertical cliff of white limestone that no human being could climb without ropes and pitons and hours of daylight. 13 men climbed it in 45 minutes. Sam went first. His fingers found cracks in the rock that were barely wider than a pencil. His boots scraped against ledges that crumbled under his weight. His fingernails broke and bled. The stone was cold in the pre-dawn darkness, slick with dew, and every handhold was the gamble between grip and gravity. One slip meant a 50-meter fall onto the rocks below. There would be no surviving that fall. There would be no second chance. Henry climbed directly behind Sam, his broad shoulders scraping against the narrow chimney cracks, his breathing controlled and steady despite the strain that made his forearms shake. Below Henry, Bigbo moved with a speed and agility that seemed impossible, scrambling up the rock face like a squirrel finding holds by instinct rather than sight. When Sam's hand reached over the top edge of the cliff, the first light of dawn was touching the eastern horizon. He pulled himself up, lay flat on his stomach, and looked at what was waiting. German bunkers, 15 meters away. Machine gun crews firing south, their backs turned spent brass cascading from the guns in golden waterfalls. Mortar teams dropping shells into tubes with mechanical rhythm. Sam waited until all 13 men were on the ledge. He gave the signal in Creek. What followed was not a battle, it was a reckoning. 13 men poured over the cliff edge and hit the German positions from the direction no one expected. Grenades flew, rifles cracked. The fighting was so close that some of it was done with knives and fists, and the butts of rifles swung like clubs. Sam tackled a German soldier twice his size and pinned him against a sandbag wall. Henry seized a machine gun barrel with his bare hands, burning his palms on the hot metal, and wrenched it sideways so hard that the mount snapped. Bigbo threw 2 grenades into an artillery pit with the accuracy of a man who had pitched baseballs on the sandlots of Lawton, Oklahoma, and both grenades landed exactly where he intended. The German line shattered. Defenders who had been confident in their fortress suddenly found the enemy inside the walls behind them among them. Panic spread like fire in dry grass. The southern assault, which had been dying on the open slope, surged forward as German fire slackened. But victory has a price, and the price of Bloody Ridge was higher than Sam Harjo could have imagined. It happened in the last minutes of the fight. The Germans were pulling back. Their line was broken. A machine gunner retreating down the eastern slope turned and fired a final burst. Not aimed, not deliberate, just the blind, desperate spray of a man who was running and could not stop his finger from squeezing the trigger. Henry Tallchief pushed Sam sideways. The motion was so fast that Sam did not understand what had happened until he was on the ground and Henry was falling beside him. 3 rounds had hit Henry in the chest. The entry wounds were small. The exit wounds were not. Sam caught Henry before he hit the rock. He held him. Henry's blood was warm and it soaked through Sam's uniform and onto the white limestone beneath them, spreading in a pattern that looked like a map of a country that did not exist. Henry spoke in Osage first, words Sam did not understand. Then he switched to English and his voice was quieter than Sam had ever heard it. Cornbread, in my pocket, send it to Ruth. Sam reached into Henry's left chest pocket. His fingers found a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The cornbread, dry, crumbled to pieces. The cornbread that Ruth Tallchief had baked in Fairfax, Oklahoma, and sent with her brother across an ocean to a war that was never supposed to take him. Henry had kept it next to his heart since the USS Leonard Wood. He had never eaten his half. He had been saving it. Saving it for the moment he came home and could share it with his sister and tell her he had carried the smell of Oklahoma all the way to Sicily and back. Henry Tallchief died on the summit of Bloody Ridge, 23 years old. His eyes were open and they reflected the sunrise over the Mediterranean, the same sunrise that Ernest Childers had promised on the ship. Hesky habitike omus. The sun will rise. The sun rose. But it rose on a world that no longer had Henry Tallchief in it. Sam held his friend for a long time. He did not cry. His eyes were dry as the Sicilian dust. Around him, the sounds of war continued. Fire, moaning, officers shouting orders to secure the ridge, evacuate the wounded, count the dead. But Sam did not hear any of it. He heard only the wind across the tall grass prairie of Oklahoma. The sound of two boys running through the Badlands. The sound of Henry laughing. Samuel Harjo lost his closest friend on Bloody Ridge. And the anger that he had carried inside him for 22 years, the anger at Coloco, at the Bureau of Indian Affairs and at Hadley, at the entire architecture of a country that had tried to unmake him, that anger now had a new target. The enemy, in all enemies. Every face that was not Creek, every uniform that was not American, every man who had ever held a weapon pointed in his direction. In the 72 hours that followed Bloody Ridge, Sam Harjo became someone his friends did not recognize. He volunteered for every patrol. He took every risk. He moved through the Sicilian countryside with a cold efficiency that frightened the men around him. Childers pulled him aside. Harjo, are you looking for death, or are you looking for a reason to live? Sam did not answer. He did not have an answer. 3 days after Bloody Ridge, Sam and Big Bo were on a forward patrol when they found an abandoned German aid station in a stone farmhouse. Inside, 5 German soldiers lay on stretchers, badly wounded, unarmed. Medical supplies scattered across the floor. The German medics had fled, leaving their patients behind. Among the 5 wounded men, Sam recognized a face. Klaus Reinhardt, the young German from the bunker at Biscari, the man Sam had given first aid to 2 weeks earlier. Reinhardt was alive, but barely. The stomach wound had been dressed, but infection had set in. His skin was gray. His eyes were glassy with fever. He shivered despite the 100-degree heat. He was speaking in delirium, the words tumbling out in German, broken and repetitive. Mutter, mutter, die Koordinaten waren richtig, 23 Tag. Big Bo had studied basic German during intelligence training at Fort Sill. He translated quietly. He is saying, mother, mother. The coordinates were correct. 23 dead. Sam went still. 23. That was the exact number of American soldiers killed by German artillery on the beach at Skogliti on the night of the invasion. Reinhardt was a rangefinder operator. He had calculated the coordinates that guided those shells. He had not pulled a trigger. He had not looked anyone in the eye. He had read numbers off a device and shouted them into a radio. But 23 men died because those numbers were correct. Sam stood over Reinhardt. He looked down at the German's face. Young, 24 years old, the same generation, the same war, but on opposite sides of a line drawn by old men in capital cities who would never stand on a beach or climb a cliff or hold a dying friend. Sam pulled the Colt 45 from his holster. He checked the magazine. He racked the slide. The sound of a round chambering is one of the most distinctive sounds in the world. A small mechanical click that carries the weight of finality. Big Bo looked at Sam. He said nothing. This was not his decision. This was between Aumann the German and the ghost of 23 men. Sam aimed the pistol at Reinhardt's head. Inside Sam's mind, 2 voices fought for control. The first voice was rage. 23 men. Henry, Kiloko, the stolen land, every injustice he had ever swallowed without complaint. This is war. He killed your brothers. No one will know. No one will judge. Pull the trigger. You have earned the right. The second voice was Grandfather Thomas sitting on the porch in Okmulgee, holding a bowl of sofgi, watching the sun go down. A true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. A true warrior carries the fallen man back to his feet. But grandfather, this man killed 23 of our people. And if you kill him, what are you? Are you a Creek warrior? Or are you the thing that Hadley wrote about in his journal, 30 Seconds? The longest 30 seconds of Samuel Harjo's life. The pistol did not waver. His hand was steady. His breathing was even. This was not a man shaking with emotion. This was a man standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down perfectly calm, deciding whether to step forward or step back. Reinhardt opened his eyes, fever glazed, unfocused, barely conscious. He looked up at the dark face above him and the black circle of the gun barrel. He did not beg. He did not plead. He whispered one word, bitte, Wasser, please, water. Not mercy, not forgiveness, not an apology, just water. The simplest human need. The request of a child who is thirsty and trusts that the adult above him will provide. Sam lowered the gun. He holstered it. He knelt beside Reinhardt. He uncapped his canteen and poured water into the German's mouth. Reinhardt drank, and the water spilled down his chin, mixing with dust and dried blood, leaving clean trails on his dirty skin. Then Sam did what his grandfather had done 25 years before in France. He lifted Reinhardt onto his back, and he walked. 4 miles, under the Sicilian sun. Reinhardt weighed roughly 150 pounds. Sam weighed less after 2 weeks of combat rations and sleepless nights. Every step was a decision. Continue or set him down. Every 100 yards was a negotiation with his own body, which screamed at him to stop, and his own soul, which told him that if he put this man down, he would never pick anything up again. Not Reinhardt, himself. Big Bo walked alongside, keeping watch rifle ready. He did not offer to help carry the German. He understood that this weight was Sam's to bear. This was not about saving an enemy. This was about Sam Harjo deciding what kind of man he would be for the rest of his life. When they reached the American aid station, Sam laid Reinhardt on a stretcher. Medics rushed forward. Sam stood bent over, the hands on his knees, gasping for air, his back a solid wall of pain. Then he reached into his left chest pocket. He pulled out the half bar of Hershey's chocolate, 3 weeks old, soft from the heat. The foil wrapper creased and worn smooth from being pressed against his ribs through 3 battles and a night march and the death of his best friend. He placed the chocolate beside Reinhardt's hand. He did not say a word. He turned and walked away. The chocolate was the last piece of Grandfather Thomas. The memory of a 5-year-old boy in a general store tasting sweetness for the first time while his grandfather smiled. Sam gave it to Reinhardt not because he forgave the German. He gave it away because he needed to let go of the anger, of the need for revenge, of the weight of carrying hatred across an ocean and up a cliff and through a war that had already taken everything that mattered. By giving away the most precious thing he owned, Sam Harjo gave away his rage. And in its place, something else settled into his chest. Not peace, not yet, but the absence of fire. A quiet space where the wolf of fear and the wolf of anger both sat down and closed their eyes. That evening, Robert Hadley arrived at the aid station. He saw Sam. He saw Reinhardt on the stretcher. He saw the chocolate bar melting in the heat beside the German's hand. Hadley asked no questions. He did not need to. He understood. That night, Hadley opened his journal and wrote the final entry he would ever make about the native soldiers of the 181st Infantry Regiment. Today I saw something that West Point does not teach. I saw a Creek corporal carry the enemy 4 miles in the sun and then give him his last chocolate bar. My father worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. My father said they needed to be civilized. My father was wrong. We are the ones who need to learn. Robert Hadley wrote those words in July of 1943. He would keep that journal for 40 years. And in 1986, that journal would become the only evidence that helped Samuel Harjo receive what America had owed him for half a century. But that story belongs to another chapter. If this story makes you think, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for this channel, for the soldiers who were never named. The end of July 1943. Patton gave the order that every infantryman in the 45th Division dreaded. Take Palermo, before the British. Over 100 miles of mountain road. On foot, the race to Palermo was not a tactical necessity. It was a competition between generals paid for in blisters and blood and the kind of exhaustion that makes a man hallucinate. Patton wanted to beat Montgomery to the prize. The infantry would carry the 181st walked. They walked on feet that had blistered and blistered again until the skin underneath was raw as butchered meat. They walked with canteens that ran dry by noon in the Sicilian furnace. They walked past stalled trucks and broken tanks and British units that had stopped for tea and would not reach Palermo for another 2 days. They walked because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant Henry on the white rock with the sunrise in his dead eyes. Sam walked at the front, not because he was the strongest, because if he stopped, the grief would catch him. And if the grief caught him, his legs would stop working and they would never start again. The Sicilian mountains rose and fell like waves frozen in stone. White limestone roads reflected the sun so fiercely that the men squinted until their faces ached. Dust coated everything. Uniforms turned white, hair turned white, faces turned into masks of powder and sweat. They looked like ghosts marching through a ghost landscape. On the second day of the march, the column passed through a village so small it did not appear on any military map. Stone houses, tile roofs, a church with a bell tower. The villagers stood by the road and watched the Americans pass with expressions that mixed relief and fear in equal measure. An old woman stepped out from a doorway. She wore black from head to foot, the traditional mourning clothes of Sicilian widows. Her face was creased with lines that mapped decades of sun and wind and loss. Her hands were thin as bird bones. She carried a round loaf of focaccia bread and a clay jug of water. She held them out to Sam. He was the first man in the column, and she gave them to him without a word. Sam looked at her face. Brown eyes deep set in weathered skin. She looked like his mother, Martha. She looked like every mother in every country who waits for sons who may not come home. Sam bit into the focaccia. It was warm from a brick oven. The crust cracked between his teeth, golden and crisp. The inside was soft and dense, soaked with olive oil and dusted with coarse sea salt. The flavor was nothing like cornbread, nothing like Sofka, but the feeling was the same. Someone had made this for a stranger, for no reason except kindness, the simplest and most powerful reason in the world. Sam broke the bread and passed pieces down the column. Each man received a fragment. They chewed as they walked. A piece of Sicily entering the bodies of men from Oklahoma carried forward on feet that refused to stop. They entered Palermo on a morning in the first week of August. The people threw flowers from balconies. Children ran alongside the dusty column, but the soldiers were too exhausted to smile. They had marched through terrain that should have taken a week and 3 days. They had not slept for 40 hours. Their eyes were hollow and their cheeks were sunken, and their uniforms hung on frames that had lost 15 pounds since Scogliti. Patton arrived later, clean uniform, polished boots, ivory pistol gleaming. He rode through the city in a jeep and accepted the cheers. He got his headlines. He got his photographs. The men of the 181st sat under olive trees on the outskirts of the city. They pulled off their boots and placed their ruined feet in buckets of water drawn from a well. No one photographed them. No one wrote their names in the newspaper. They sat in the shade and let the water cool the fire in their souls and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Sam received word that afternoon. Klaus Reinhardt was alive, evacuated to a prisoner of war camp in North Africa. His wounds were healing. Later that day, Jack Montgomery found Sam. Montgomery was Cherokee, a lieutenant in another company of the 45th, a man who spoke quietly but carried an authority that had nothing to do with rank. Montgomery had heard about Sam carrying Reinhardt. "You know what you did?" Harjo Montgomery said. "You gave that German something this country does not give us very often. A second chance." Montgomery paused. Then he put his hand on Sam's shoulder. "You are a warrior. Do not let anyone tell you different." Sam stood on the Sicilian coast that evening, looking across the Strait of Messina toward the Italian mainland. The mountains of southern Italy rose in the distance, blue and hazy, taller than anything in Sicily. Winter was coming. The Germans were waiting. In his left chest pocket, Sam carried 3 things. His mother's letter, faded and soft from weeks of sweat and rain. The cloth that had once held Henry's cornbread, now containing only crumbs so fine they were more like dust. And something new. A scrap of paper that had fallen from Reinhardt's pocket during the 4-mile carry. A piece of sheet music, handwritten musical notes, scrawled in pencil on German military stationery. Sam could not read music. He did not know what the notes meant. But he kept the paper because it was proof that the enemy was also human. A man who writes music is not a monster. That was what Grandfather Thomas would have said. Samuel Harjo would carry that scrap of music through Italy, through the cruelest winter in European memory, through the liberation of a place called Dachau that would change him in ways he could not yet imagine, through the victory parades he was not invited to through the ship, home through 43 years of silence on a reservation in Oklahoma. And on an autumn day in 1986, a letter from Dresden, East Germany, would arrive at the wooden house on the Creek Reservation in Okmulgee. The letter would begin with these words: "To the warrior who gave me water and chocolate, I have kept my promise." Sam would open that letter with the trembling hands of a 65-year-old man. And for the first time since Henry Tallchief died on Bloody Ridge for the first time in 43 years, Samuel Harjo would weep. But that is a story for the final chapter. And the final chapter begins not in Oklahoma and not in Germany. It begins in a place that Samuel Harjo never spoke about, a place that he saw for 20 minutes in April of 1945 and carried inside him for the rest of his life, a place called Dachau. The war did not end at Palermo. It did not end when Sicily fell in August of 1943. It did not end when the 45th Division crossed the Strait of Messina and set foot on the Italian mainland in September. The war simply changed its face. In Sicily, it had been heat and dust and the sharp white stone of limestone ridges. In Italy, it became mud and rain and cold so deep it settled into a man's bones and stayed there like a tenant who refuses to leave. September 9th, 1943. The beaches at Salerno. Another amphibious landing and another wall of German fire. But this time the men of the 181st did not flinch the way they had at Skogliti. They had been through the fire. They knew its temperature. They knew its sound. They knew that the only direction was forward because backward was just a slower way to die. Sam Harjo moved through Italy in a state that his comrades could not name but recognized instinctively. He was not broken. Broken men stopped functioning. Sam functioned with terrifying precision. He led patrols without hesitation. He read terrain the way a pianist reads sheet music, seeing the notes before his fingers touched the keys. He made decisions in combat that saved lives, and he made them with a calm that unnerved even the veterans. But outside of combat, Sam was a ghost. He ate alone. He slept alone when he slept at all, which was rarely. He spoke only when spoken to, and his answers were short and flat, like stones skipped across water. The men called him Ghost, not because of his silence in battle. They had always known he could move without sound. They called him Ghost because of his silence everywhere else. The laughter was gone. The rare half-smile that Henry Tallchief used to coax out of him with a stupid joke or a piece of shared cornbread, that was gone too. Henry had taken it with him when he fell on Bloody Ridge, and nothing in Italy or anywhere else on earth was going to bring it back. The Italian winter of 1943 was the cruelest season any of them had ever known. Rain fell for days without stopping, turning roads into rivers of brown mud that swallowed boots to the ankle and trucks to the axle. Temperatures dropped below freezing in the mountains. The men wore wool overcoats that soaked through in minutes and then clung to their bodies like cold, wet skin. Sea rations froze solid inside the cans and had to be tucked inside shirts against bare stomachs for 30 minutes before the contents thawed enough to eat. The taste of cold canned meat and frozen beans became the taste of Italy, and for the rest of their lives, the survivors would gag at the smell of canned stew. The mountains were worse than anything Sicily had offered. The Apennine Range rose like a wall across the center of Italy, and every ridge was defended. Every valley was mined. Every bridge was blown. The Germans fought a retreating defense that was brilliant in its cruelty. They did not try to hold every position. They held just long enough to bleed the Americans, then fell back to the next ridge and did it again. The 45th Division pushed forward mile by bloody mile, and the cost was measured not in territory gained, but in names crossed off the morning roster. Sam did not count the days. He counted the faces that disappeared. A Choctaw corporal from Durant, Oklahoma, killed by a sniper outside Venafro. A Cherokee private from Tahlequah shot through the neck during a river crossing at the Volturno. A white sergeant from Tulsa who had learned 3 words of Creek and used them every morning as a greeting, killed by a mine that took both legs and left him screaming for 40 minutes before the medics could reach him. Each death carved another line into the stone wall inside Sam's chest. He did not grieve. He did not rage. He simply added the name to the list and kept walking. Ernest Childers continued to lead with the quiet authority that had earned him the respect of every man in the regiment, regardless of race. On September 22, 1943, near the town of Oliveto Childers, did something that would earn him the Medal of Honor. He led an assault up a hill alone after his squad was pinned down and single-handedly eliminated 2 machine gun nests and captured a German sniper. He did this with a broken foot. The bone had snapped during the initial charge, and Childers had kept going because stopping was not something he knew how to do. When the news came through that Childers had been awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States could bestow, Sam felt nothing that he would call surprise. He had seen Childers on the ship before Skogliti, walking through the hold in the darkness, speaking 4 words of Creek to frighten men. Heshi havti kie omes. The sun will rise. A man like that did not need a medal to prove what he was. But the medal did something that no amount of courage on the battlefield had accomplished. It cracked a wall, not the wall inside Sam, the wall between the native soldiers and the white soldiers who served alongside them. The Medal of Honor pinned on the chest of a Muskogee Creek officer was a fact that could not be argued with, dismissed, or filed away in a report with the wrong names at the top. It was the highest honor in the land, and it belonged to one of them. Robert Hadley changed after Childers received the medal. He had been changing slowly since Sicily, since the night Sam pushed him out of the path of a bullet on Skogliti Beach, since the afternoon he watched Sam carry a German soldier 4 miles and leave a chocolate bar beside his hand. But the change had been private internal, written in a journal that no one else read. After the Medal of Honor, Hadley's change became public. He began writing reports with the correct names. Native soldiers who led patrols were credited for leading patrols. Native soldiers who took objectives were credited for taking objectives. He recommended Sam for a Silver Star for actions at Biscari and Bloody Ridge. He told other officers in a voice loud enough to be heard, and remembered that if Childers deserved the Medal of Honor, then Harjo deserved the Silver Star, and probably more. Sam heard about the recommendation. He said nothing. Medals did not bring Henry back. Medals did not give his grandfather's land back. Medals did not open the front door of the general store in Okmulgee. But somewhere deep in the stone wall of his chest, in a crack so small, he almost did not feel it, something shifted. Not warmth, not gratitude, just the faintest acknowledgement that Robert Hadley was trying to become something his father had never been, trying to see what had always been in front of him. The war ground on. Anzio in January 1944, a beachhead that turned into a siege. The 45th Division pinned down for months in a flat marshy landscape that the Germans shelled day and night. Jack Montgomery, the Cherokee lieutenant, who had told Sam he was a warrior on the coast of Sicily, earned his own Medal of Honor at Padiglione on February 22, 1944. Montgomery attacked 3 German positions alone, killing 11 enemy soldiers, taking 32 prisoners, and clearing a path for his company to advance. 2 Native Americans from the 45th Division now held the Medal of Honor. The facts were becoming impossible to ignore. Then came southern France. August 1944. Then the push into Germany itself. The mountains gave way to forests, and the forests gave way to farmland, and the farmland gave way to cities that had been bombed into rubble. The men of the 181st had been fighting for more than a year without rest. The original Thunderbirds from Oklahoma, the men who had trained at Fort Sill and sailed on the Leonard Wood and stormed the beach at Skogliti, were fewer now, so many fewer. Their places had been filled by replacements who did not know the history, who had not climbed Bloody Ridge, who had never tasted Ruth Tall Chief's cornbread. The replacements were good soldiers, but they were not brothers, not in the way that mattered. April 29, 1945. The 45th Infantry Division received orders to advance on a facility outside the city of Munich in southern Germany. The name of the facility was Dachau. Nothing in Samuel Harjo's life prepared him for what he saw when he walked through the gates of Dachau concentration camp. Nothing in any man's life could have prepared him. The 45th Division was among the first Allied units to enter the camp, and what they found there would haunt every man who witnessed it until the day he died, and probably beyond. The smell reached them before the gates, a smell that was not like anything in nature, not rot, not decay, something worse. The smell of systematic annihilation, of human bodies burned in ovens and stacked in piles and left in open rail cars that sat on the tracks inside the camp like some nightmare freight delivery. Sam walked through the gate and stopped. In front of him, behind barbed wire, stood the survivors. Men who weighed less than 80 pounds, skulls visible beneath paper-thin skin, eyes enormous in faces that had been stripped of everything except bone and suffering. Striped uniforms hanging on frames that were more skeleton than flesh. Some of them reached through the wire with hands that looked like bundles of twigs. Some of them simply stood and stared, too weak to move, too broken to believe that liberation was real. Sam looked at Dachau and understood something that he had been circling for his entire life without ever landing on it. The thing that Coloco had done to him, the forced assimilation, the erasure of language and culture and identity, the belief that one group of people had the right to decide that another group was less than human, that thing had a logical endpoint, and he was standing in it. Coloco had cut his hair and forbidden his language. Dachau had done the same to millions and then gone further. So much further that the distance between a boarding school in Oklahoma and a death camp in Bavaria seemed both infinite and terrifyingly small. The same seed, the same root, the same poison tree. One had pruned the branches, the other had burned the forest to the ground. Sam Harjo, the man who had not wept since Bloody Ridge, did not weep at Dachau either. He vomited. He bent over beside a concrete wall and emptied his stomach onto German soil. Then he straightened up. He walked to the nearest survivor, a man who might have been 30 or 60. It was impossible to tell, and he knelt beside him. He uncapped his canteen. He held the water to the man's lips and let him drink. The same gesture he had made for Klaus Reinhardt on a hillside in Sicily 2 years earlier. Water for a dying man, the simplest act of mercy, the hardest thing in the world when the world has given you every reason to stop being merciful. Sam stayed at Dachau for less than a day. The division moved on. The war ended 2 weeks later. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Soldiers fired guns into the air and hugged each other and laughed and cried. Sam stood apart. He watched the celebration from a distance the way you watch fireworks from across a river. Beautiful, bright, happening to someone else. The ship home crossed the Atlantic in the other direction, and everything was the same, and nothing was the same. The ocean was still gray. The hold still smelled of oil and sweat. But the men in the hold were not the men who had sailed east 2 years ago. They were older in ways that had nothing to do with the calendar. They carried invisible weight that no scale could measure. And some of them, like Sam, carried a silence so complete that it had its own gravity. Okmulgee, Oklahoma, autumn 1945. Sam stepped off the bus at the station on Main Street. 24 years old, 30 pounds lighter than the day he enlisted. His uniform hung on him like a scarecrow's clothes. On his chest, 2 decorations, a Purple Heart for wounds received at Bloody Ridge, a Bronze Star for valor at Biscari recommended by Lieutenant Robert Hadley in a report that carried the correct name. Martha Harjo stood at the gate of the family house. She was thinner. Her hair was whiter. The lines on her face were deeper. But her smile had not changed. Not 1 degree. She smiled at Sam the way she had smiled at him every evening when he came home from school, the way she had smiled at him the day he left, the way she would smile at him for the next 30 years until the day she died in her sleep in 1978, with that smile still on her face. She had made Sofka. Of course she had made Sofka. What else would she make for a son who had come home from war? The clay pot sat on the outdoor fire pit, steam rising in the cool October air, and the smell of corn and oak smoke drifted across the yard and met Sam before his mother did. He sat on the porch, the same wooden floor cool under his bare feet, the same view of the tall grass prairie stretching to the horizon. The chair beside him was empty. Grandfather Thomas had died in the spring of 1944, while Sam was pinned down at Anzio. Martha had written a letter. The letter arrived 3 months late. By the time Sam read it, the grief was already old, already settled into that stone wall in his chest alongside Henry and the nameless dead of Skogliti and the skeletal faces of Dachau. Sam held the bowl of Sofgate with both hands. The warmth spread through his palms. The taste was exactly as he remembered. Sweet corn, faint salt from the ash. The taste of home. The taste of safety. The taste of knowing where you belong. He reached into his chest pocket and placed 3 items on the table beside the bowl. His mother's letter faded and soft as cloth from 2 years of being pressed against his heart. The scrap of fabric that had held Henry's cornbread, containing now only a fine dust that smelled faintly of corn if you held it close enough, and the scrap of sheet music that had fallen from Klaus Reinhardt's pocket on a Sicilian road, the penciled notes faded but still legible to anyone who could read music, which Sam could not. 3 objects, 3 years of war, everything he brought home. Martha looked at the objects on the table. She did not ask what they were. She did not ask about the war. She did not ask about the Bronze Star or the Purple Heart. She simply picked up the ladle and filled Sam's bowl a second time. Sam drank the sofka. Tears ran down his face without sound. He did not sob. He did not shake. The tears simply came sliding down his cheeks and dropping into the bowl, mixing with the corn soup, adding salt. He drank his own tears with his mother's sofk on the porch where his grandfather used to sit, and he did not try to stop them because stopping them would have meant acknowledging them, and acknowledging them would have meant explaining, and explaining was something Samuel Harjo would not do for 43 years. The week after he came home, Sam walked into town to buy supplies at the general store on Main Street. He wore his uniform. The medals were pinned to his chest. He pushed open the front door. The man behind the counter looked up. He looked at Sam's face. He looked at the medals. Then he pointed to the side of the building. Back door, friend. Natives use the back door. Sam stood in that doorway for 10 seconds. He looked down at his chest. Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He looked up at the sign above the entrance. Whites only. 2 words painted in black letters on a whiteboard. 2 words that carried the weight of 400 years of history. Sam turned around. He walked out. He did not hit the man. He did not raise his voice. He did not come back to that store ever again. He walked home and he sat on the porch and he looked at the prairie and he said nothing. This is the moment that every Native American veteran of every war knows in his bones. You fight for a country. That country does not fight for you. You bleed on foreign soil for a flag that does not fully cover you. You come home a hero in the eyes of history and a second-class citizen in the eyes of the law. The men who wrote the Constitution did not write it for you. The men who built the monuments did not build them in your image. The land of the free is your land, was always your land, but the free does not always include you. Samuel Harjo did not become bitter. He did not have time for bitterness. He had a family to build and a life to live and a language to save. He married Lena Berryhill in 1947. Lena was Creek, a nurse at the Okmulgee Hospital, a woman with steady hands and a laugh that could fill a room. The Berryhills were an old Creek family, and Lena understood without being told that Sam carried something inside him that would not come out in words. She did not push. She did not pry. She simply loved him in the practical way that people love each other when they have both seen enough of the world to know that love is not a feeling, but a decision made fresh every morning. They had 3 children. The first son they named Thomas after Sam's grandfather. The second they named Martha after Sam's mother. The third they named Henry after the man who died on Bloody Ridge holding a piece of cornbread meant for his sister. Sam became a carpenter. He built houses on the reservation with his own hands. Cedar frames, pine floors, tin roofs that rang like bells in the Oklahoma rain. He worked quietly and precisely the same way he had moved through the Sicilian darkness. And the houses he built stood for decades because a man who has seen the fragility of life builds things to last. Every year on the anniversary of Henry's death, a letter arrived from Ruth Tallchief in Fairfax. Ruth had become a nurse, as Henry always said she would. She married. She had children. But every July she wrote to Sam, and every July Sam wrote back. 2 lines. I remember Henry. The sun will rise. The Purple Heart and the Bronze Star went into the bottom drawer of the bedroom dresser underneath the winter coats. Sam never took them out. He never showed them to his children. He never spoke of the war at all except once. Thomas was 15 years old. He came home from school with a bloody lip. A white boy had called him a name. Thomas wanted to fight. Thomas wanted revenge. Thomas wanted to burn something down. Sam sat on the porch with his son. He said nothing for a long time. The prairie wind blew through the grass and the sun was going down the way it always did in Oklahoma, slow and orange and enormous. Then Sam spoke the only words about the war he would ever speak to his children. Son, the world will tell you that you are small. Do not listen. You are Creek. You are Thunderbird. You are the son of a warrior. And a true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. Thomas did not understand. Just as Sam had not understood at 17 when grandfather Thomas said the same words on this same porch. The understanding would come later. It always comes later. That is the nature of the truths that matter most. They arrive early and are understood late. 40 years passed, 40 Oklahoma summers, 40 Oklahoma winters, 40 years of building houses and raising children and sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sun go down over the same prairie his grandfather had watched. 40 years of silence about a war that lived inside him as vividly as the day it happened. Thomas grew up, became a teacher, taught Muskogee Creek language at the tribal school in Okmulgee. Every morning he began class with the same words. Hesky Hvke Omis. The sun will rise. He did not know where his father had learned that phrase. He did not know that a Muskogee Creek lieutenant named Ernest Childers had spoken it in the dark hold of a troop ship the night before the invasion of Sicily. He only knew that his father said it sometimes quietly on the porch and that it mattered. Martha became a social worker on the reservation. Henry the youngest joined the army, served in Vietnam, came home with his own silence. He and Sam sat on the porch together in the evenings after Henry's return. Neither spoke. They did not need to. They shared a language that had no words, the language of men who have seen war and carry it like a stone in their chests. October 1986. Sam was 65 years old. His hair was white, his back curved from decades of carpentry. His hands were scarred and strong and steady. He sat in the rocking chair on the porch. Grandfather Thomas's chair, the wood worn smooth by 3 generations of Harjo men. Lena brought him a letter. Thin envelope, East German stamps, handwriting that was neat and precise and unfamiliar. Sam opened the letter. Inside were 2 pages written in English that was grammatically imperfect, but clear, in a black and white photograph of a man in his late 60s standing beside a piano in a small apartment. Dear Mr. Harjo, my name is Klaus Reinhardt. You may not remember me, but I remember you, every day for 43 years. In July of 1943 in Sicily, you carried me 4 miles when I was dying. You gave me water when I was thirsty. You left a chocolate bar beside my hand. I did not know your name then. I only remember your face. And those dark eyes that the German propaganda told us belonged to savages. You were not a savage. You were the most humane person I have ever met. After the war, I returned to Dresden. I teach piano. I married. I have a daughter named Elke. Her middle name is Hershey after the chocolate bar you gave me. My wife thinks I am crazy. She may be right. I have been searching for you for 43 years, through the Red Cross, through American veterans organizations, through military archives. Finally, a retired American officer named Robert Hadley answered my letter. Mr. Hadley gave me your address. He also enclosed a copy of a page from his wartime journal. You may wish to ask Mr. Hadley about that page. I kept the promise I made to myself on that stretcher in 1943. If I survived, I would spend the rest of my life teaching my children and grandchildren that the enemy can also be the one who saves your life, that humanity does not recognize nationality or race or language. I would like to meet you, if you will allow it, with the deepest gratitude. Klaus Reinhardt, Dresden, East Germany. Sam read the letter. He read it again. He read it a 3rd time. Then Samuel Harjo, the man who had not wept since the porch in 1945, the man who had carried Bloody Ridge in Dachau and 40 years of silence inside a stone wall in his chest, felt that wall crack. Not a small crack. The kind of crack that starts at the bottom and runs it all the way to the foundation and lets the light pour in. He wept, not silently this time. He wept with his whole body shaking in the rocking chair, the letter pressed against his chest, tears falling onto the porch boards that 3 generations of Harjo feet had worn smooth. Lena came running. She sat beside him and put her arms around him and held him, and did not ask a single question, because after 39 years of marriage, she knew that this moment had been building since before she met him, and it needed to come out the way a river needs to find the sea. Sam called Robert Hadley in Abilene, Texas 2 days later. It was the first time the 2 men had spoken since 1945. Hadley was 69, retired, running the family cattle ranch. His voice on the telephone was older, but Sam recognized it immediately. Some voices you never forget, especially the voices that once held the power to diminish you. Hadley told Sam that Reinhardt had written to him in 1985, asking if Hadley knew the name of the Creek soldier who had saved a German sergeant in Sicily in 1943. Hadley had known immediately. I never forgot Harjo, not for one day. Then Hadley said something that made Sam grip the telephone receiver so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I sent Reinhardt a copy of my journal page, and I sent the Department of Defense another copy, along with a nomination for the Silver Star for your actions at Biscari and Bloody Ridge. Sam was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What nomination?" Hadley's voice cracked. "The Silver Star Harjo, the one I should have submitted 40 years ago. I did not have the courage then. The paperwork was there, the evidence was there. But I was afraid of what the other officers would say if I pushed for a decoration for a Creek corporal based on actions that I had initially tried to prevent. I was a coward. I am not a coward anymore." Silence on the line. The hum of long-distance telephone wires stretching across the plains from Oklahoma to Texas. Then Sam spoke. "Robert." It was the first time Sam had ever used Hadley's first name. "You do not owe me anything," Sam said. "I know," Hadley replied, "but America does, and the least I can do is start paying." Spring 1987. The Berlin Wall had not yet fallen, but East Germany, under pressure from the Red Cross and the growing cracks in the Soviet system, granted Klaus Reinhardt permission to travel to the United States on humanitarian grounds. Reinhardt flew to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hadley drove from Abilene to pick him up. Three men converged on the wooden house on the Creek Reservation in Okmulgee. Sam, 66 years old. Reinhardt, 68. Hadley, 70. Three old men who had last seen each other on an island in the Mediterranean when they were young and afraid and capable of killing each other. Martha and Lena cooked. Not a feast, not a banquet, just food. Sofke, because you cannot welcome someone into a Creek home without sofke. Cornbread baked by Lena from the recipe that had been in the Harjo family for generations, the same recipe that Ruth Tallchief had used when she baked the bread that Henry carried to Sicily. Venison stew, because Sam's youngest son Henry had hunted a deer the week before and the meat was fresh. A loaf of focaccia bread that Lena had learned to bake from an Italian cookbook she bought at a church sale because she knew about the old woman in Sicily, even though Sam had never told her, because wives know things that husbands never say. And on the table in the center, resting on a white plate like an offering on an altar, a single Hershey's chocolate bar. Three old men sat around a wooden table on the porch. The Oklahoma wind moved through the tall grass. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. The smell of sofke drifted through the air like a prayer. Reinhardt had brought two items from Dresden. The first was a small cloth patch, a golden thunderbird on a red diamond, the 45th Division insignia. Reinhardt had taken it from an abandoned American supply depot in Sicily in 1943 and kept it for 44 years. He placed it on the table in front of Sam. The second was a bound sheaf of sheet music, handwritten. The title on the front page read Skogliti, a piano composition written for the soldier who had carried the composer on his back through enemy territory and left a piece of chocolate beside his hand. Reinhardt spoke slowly in English that carried the careful precision of a man who had practiced these words many times. "You did not kill me when you could have. You gave me water when I was thirsty. You gave me chocolate when I was hungry. You gave me 43 years of life, teaching, loving, being a father. I do not know the words to say what that means. The only word I have is thank you. And it is not enough. It will never be enough." Sam reached into the drawer of the table beside his rocking chair. His hand found a piece of paper so old and worn that it felt like cloth. The scrap of sheet music that had fallen from Reinhardt's pocket on the road in Sicily 44 years ago. Penciled notes on German military stationery faded but still there. Sam placed the scrap beside the bound composition. Old and new. The first notes of a conversation that had taken 44 years to complete. Reinhardt stared at the scrap. His eyes went red. His chin trembled. "You kept it." Sam looked at Reinhardt with eyes that had seen Skogliti and Biscari and Bloody Ridge and Dachau and a whites-only sign in his own hometown. Eyes that had watched Henry die. Eyes that had almost pulled a trigger on the very man sitting across from him. "You were the enemy," Sam said. But you also wrote music. My grandfather said that a man who writes music is not a monster. Thomas Sam's son stood in the doorway with his daughter Lucy on his hip. Lucy was 7. She had her grandfather's dark eyes and her grandmother Lena's wide smile. She looked at the old German man and the old white Texan and her grandfather, and she saw 3 men who were crying without making a sound the way old men cry when the feelings are too big for their bodies. Thomas listened to his father speak, and for the first time in his life, he understood the words Sam had told him on this same porch when he was 15. A true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. A true warrior carries the fallen man back to his feet. Thomas had thought it was about fighting. It was not about fighting. It was about the thing that comes after fighting. The choice that defines you not in the moment of rage, but in the moment of power. The moment when you stand over a fallen enemy with a loaded weapon and the world gives you permission to pull the trigger, and you choose freely and fully to holster the gun and offer water instead. Lena broke the Hershey's chocolate bar into 4 pieces. She placed 1 piece in front of each man and kept the 4th for Thomas and Lucy to share. 4 pieces of chocolate, an old man from Oklahoma, an old man from Dresden, an old man from Texas, a teacher and a 7-year-old girl. They ate sofki together. They ate cornbread and venison stew and focaccia. They ate Hershey's chocolate. They did not speak much. There was not much that needed to be said. The food said it. The prairie wind said it. The sun going down over Oklahoma said it. 44 years of silence broken not by words, but by the act of sharing a meal. In 1988, the United States Department of Defense, after reviewing the wartime journal of Robert Hadley and the sworn testimony of Klaus Reinhardt submitted through the Red Cross, awarded the Silver Star to Corporal Samuel Harjo for gallantry in action at Biscari Airfield in Bloody Ridge, Sicily in July 1943. The ceremony was held at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the same ground where Geronimo had been imprisoned, the same ground where Sam had trained, the same ground where Hadley had told him he was better suited for the kitchen. Sam stood on the parade ground in a brown vest and pressed trousers, his Purple Heart and Bronze Star on his chest, and received the Silver Star from a brigadier general who had not been born when Sam climbed the cliffs of Bloody Ridge. Beside him stood Lena and Thomas and Martha and Henry and 6 grandchildren, including Lucy, now 8, who held her grandfather's hand and did not let go. Reinhardt sat in the front row of the guest section. Hadley sat beside him. 2 old men in folding chairs on an Oklahoma military base watching a Creek carpenter receive a medal that was 45 years overdue. Reinhardt wept openly. Hadley removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with a handkerchief that his wife had ironed that morning in Abilene. After the ceremony, Thomas brought Lucy to meet Reinhardt. Lucy looked up at the tall German man with the white hair and the kind eyes and said, "Are you the man that Grandpa carried on his back?" Reinhardt knelt down so his face was level with hers, tears on his cheeks. "Yes, little one, I am." Lucy tilted her head. "Grandpa says you write beautiful music." Reinhardt laughed through his tears, the laugh of a man who has been carrying a weight for 44 years and feels it lift from his shoulders in the presence of a child's voice. "I will play for you," he said. "Someday I will play for you." Samuel Harjo died on March 14, 2003, in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. He was 82 years old. He was buried in the Creek Nation Cemetery beside his grandfather Thomas, his mother Martha, and his wife Lena, who had died in 2001. The headstone read, "Corporal Samuel Harjo, Muskogee Creek, Thunderbird, Este Kate." The last 2 words mean brother in the language that Sam had whispered in the darkness of a boarding school dormitory to keep it alive. The language he had used on a beach in Sicily to save 13 men. The language he had taught his son Thomas on this same porch every evening for 30 years. Klaus Reinhardt died in 2001 in Dresden, Germany. He was 82. In his piano room on the music stand, the composition titled Skogliti was always open, always ready to be played. His daughter Elke, whose middle name was Hershey, became a music teacher. She taught her students that the most important note in any piece of music is the rest, the silence between the notes, because the silence is where the meaning lives. Robert Hadley died in 1999 in Abilene, Texas. He was 83. In his will, he left his wartime journal to the 45th Infantry Division Museum in Oklahoma City. The journal was placed in a glass case beside a Purple Heart and a photograph of the Thunderbird patch. The final entry, dated July 1943, was displayed open for visitors to read. Today I saw something that West Point does not teach. I saw a Creek corporal carry the enemy 4 miles in the sun and then give him his last chocolate bar. My father worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. My father said they needed to be civilized. My father was wrong. We are the ones who need to learn. Thomas Harjo became the leading Muskogee Creek language teacher in Oklahoma. He devoted his life to saving the language that the government had tried to destroy and that his father had protected in whispers in the dark. Every morning in a classroom at the tribal school in Okmulgee, Thomas began the day with the same words, Heski Hevkoma. The sun will rise. He never explained where the phrase came from. He did not need to. The students who heard it carried it with them the way seeds are carried by the wind. Some of those seeds took root. Lucy Harjo graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 2004. She was one of the first Creek women to do so. She served 2 tours in Afghanistan. On her dresser at home beside her own medals sat a small cloth patch, a golden thunderbird on a red diamond. The patch that Klaus Reinhardt had taken from a supply depot in Sicily in 1943 and carried to Dresden and then back across the ocean to Oklahoma and placed on a table in front of Samuel Harjo. Sam had given it to Thomas. Thomas had given it to Lucy. 4 generations, 1 patch, 1 story. When Lucy was asked by a reporter why she joined the Army, given the history of how the Army and the government had treated her people, she paused for a long time before answering. Then she said, "My great-great-grandfather fought in World War I and carried a German soldier home on his back. My grandfather fought in World War II and carried a different German soldier home on his back. They did not fight for generals. They did not fight for politicians. They fought for the land and for the man standing next to them. I wear this uniform for the same reason. Not because this country has always been good to us, but because we have always been good to this country. And a true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. 4 generations, 1 lesson. Passed from grandfather to father to son to granddaughter. Not in textbooks, not in classrooms. On a wooden porch in Oklahoma over bowls of corn soup in a language that was supposed to die but refused. And if you listen carefully on a quiet night in Oklahoma, when the wind moves through the tall grass and the screech owl calls from the black jack oaks, you can almost hear it. An old man's voice whispering in the dark, repeating the words that kept a language alive and a soul intact through a boarding school and a war and a lifetime of silence. Estekate, CVF XCV, Hokte, Heshi, brother, warrior, woman, son. The language did not die. The warriors that America was afraid to unleash turned out to be the very men who saved America. And the lesson they taught was not written in any military manual or carved on any monument. It was simpler than that. It was older than that. A true warrior does not kill a man who has already fallen. A true warrior carries the fallen man back to his feet. Thank you for listening. If this story deserves to be told, share it. Not for this channel, for Samuel Harjo, for Henry Tallchief, for Ernest Childers, for Jack Montgomery, for the Thunderbird Warriors of the 45th Division, who fought 2 wars, one against tyranny abroad and one for dignity at home, and won them both. From wherever you are in this world, stay safe, stay strong, and may the sun always rise. Hesi habiti kiomis.